What if a single dollar could unlock a forgotten life? A struggling single father buys a $1 book for his daughter at a dusty sidewalk sale, but tucked inside its pages is a letter, a decade-old confession written by a woman once declared dead. A billionaire heiress lost at sea. What follows isn't just a mystery unraveled. It's a revelation that changes everything. If you believe in fate, family, and the power of stories left behind, this is one you won't want to miss. The sun beat down on the sidewalk with the kind of July heat that turned car hoods into stovetops and made the town of Fairview feel smaller than it already was. Cole Maddox squinted beneath his ball cap, one hand clutching a cold soda, the other resting protectively on his daughter's shoulder as they strolled past a cluttered sidewalk book sale outside the local thrift shop. He had no business spending even a dollar. Not with the overdue rent and the truck needing a new radiator. But Harper had spotted the book table like it was a treasure chest, her hazel eyes lighting up in a way that made saying no feel criminal. Just one, she'd said, already thumbing through cracked spines and dog-eared covers. It was the kind of sale where nothing was alphabetized and most of the titles had long since faded from memory. But that didn't matter to Harper. She was sick, fiercely curious, and believed books still held secrets worth discovering. Cole watched her fingers pause on a thin, weather-worn copy of The Midnight Fox, its cover bent, its price scribbled in Sharpie. What? He nodded once. She beamed. They didn't open it until they got home. After dinner, while Harper sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, Cole reached for the book to read aloud, but something slipped from the pages. An envelope, yellowed, sealed with brittle tape, and addressed in looping, elegant cursive. Harper leaned in. Cole hesitated, fingers brushing the edge like it might vanish. He peeled it open and unfolded a letter so personal it felt like trespassing. To the daughter I never got to hold. It began, and in that moment, the air shifted, because the name signed at the bottom wasn't just anyone, it was Elizabeth Wakefield, a name the world hadn't spoken in nearly 10 years. The name sat heavy on Cole's tongue even before he said it out loud. Elizabeth Wakefield. He hadn't heard it in years. Not since the news cycle had been swallowed whole by her disappearance. Yacht lost off the coast of Maine. No body ever found. Declared dead after a lengthy search that cost millions and yielded nothing but theories. Some called it a storm. Others whispered of an escape. But no one ever mentioned a child. Not once. And yet here was her handwriting, raw and intimate, nestled inside a forgotten children's book sold for $1 at a thrift table. Cole read the letter again, slower this time, his voice low, reverent. It wasn't long, just a single page, but the weight behind each word was unmistakable. She'd written about regret, about fear, about a choice she never thought she'd have to make. She said the baby had been born in secret, placed into adoption by force. Not choice. The father, not named. The location, not given. Only the wish that one day, her daughter might find this letter and understand that none of it had ever been her fault. Harper leaned against him, her head nestled into the curve of his arm, her breathing slow and steady. She was too young to understand the gravity of the name or the ache threaded through the ink. But Cole understood. He understood too well. Loss had a smell. It clung to the inside of envelopes like that. He glanced down at her. This little girl who had once been left on the steps of a church wrapped in nothing but a blue blanket and a note with her first name. He'd never asked where she came from. Not really. He figured whoever had left her had their reasons. And now, with Elizabeth Wakefield's words in his hands, he wasn't sure he could afford to ignore those questions anymore. The next morning, while Harper slept in, Cole sat at the kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee and his laptop open. He typed the name into the search bar, not expecting much, but the internet hadn't forgotten her. Articles poured in, old headlines, photos of a smiling blonde in designer gowns, charity galas, stockholder meetings, heiress to Wakefield Holdings, a billion-dollar shipping and logistics empire. There were pieces about the investigation, interviews with her father, now deceased, no mention of a child, none. It was like Harper didn't exist. Cole scrolled through image after image, but then stopped on one, a candid photo of Elizabeth at 24 m, head turned mid-laugh, hand resting protectively on her belly. Pregnant. The caption didn't mention it, but the bump was obvious. He leaned in closer, heart pounding. It was dated 2 months before she disappeared. He didn't sleep much that night. The letter, the book, the uncanny timing. Harper had picked it out without hesitation, like she'd been drawn to it. He kept asking himself what it meant. Coincidence? Fate? Something more? He wasn't a man who believed in signs. Not really, but the facts were too strange to ignore. The letter had survived over a decade inside a forgotten book, and now, out of all the hands it could have landed in, it had found its way to Harper. He stared at the letter again. At the final line, "If you find this, please forgive me for not being there. Know that I loved you. Know that I never stopped." By the time the sun crested the horizon, casting pale gold light across their kitchen floor, Cole had made a decision. He didn't know where this road would lead, but he owed it to Harper to find out, to follow the thread, to see what else had been left behind in the wake of Elizabeth Wakefield's vanishing act, and maybe, just maybe, to find out what role his little girl had to play in a story much bigger than either of them had ever imagined. Cole wasn't the kind of man who made phone calls before sunrise, but by 6:03, he was standing on the back porch, coffee steaming in his hand, the letter folded neatly in his pocket, his thumb hovering over the screen of his phone. He'd spent the last 2 hours tracking down a name that had appeared at the bottom of one of the older articles about Elizabeth Wakefield's disappearance, Marian Ashford, the woman once listed as Elizabeth's personal attorney and longtime family confidant. Her firm was still active, her office still listed in Boston. Cole didn't expect anyone to answer that early, but to his surprise, a tired voice picked up after the second ring. He introduced himself. Then, without overthinking it, he said 6 words that changed the tone of the call entirely. "I found a letter from Elizabeth." The line went quiet. At first, Cole thought he'd lost her. Then Marian spoke, her voice suddenly sharp. "Alert!" "Where?" Cole hesitated. "Inside a children's book I bought for my daughter." It was addressed to her daughter. That was all it took. Within an hour, Marian had called back, calmer now, but still clipped. Professional. She asked for a scan of the letter. Cole sent it. She didn't respond for almost a full day. When she finally did, it wasn't with questions, it was with a plane ticket, a hotel reservation in Boston, and a meeting request for Thursday morning. Cole didn't tell Harper much, only that they were going on a little adventure. She was thrilled. Any excuse to fly was magic in her eyes. And she packed her backpack with books, crayons, and the kind of excitement only 6-year-olds carry like it's weightless. Cole, on the other hand, packed lightly, a single bag, the letter folded inside an envelope, and his nerves wrapped tight around every breath he took. The flight was uneventful, Boston colder than he expected, and the hotel fancy in a way that made him tug at the collar of his flannel and wonder if they were already out of place. Thursday came fast. Marian Ashford's office was a sleek glass box on the 22nd floor, Samal, overlooking the Charles River. Cole felt like a ghost in his worn jeans and heavy boots. Harper's small hand wrapped around his fingers. Marian herself was composed, elegant, her gray hair swept into a neat bun, her eyes sharp behind thin frame glasses. She took one look at Harper, and something in her expression cracked. "You look just like her," she murmured. Not to Cole, but to the child. They sat. Cole handed over the letter. Marian unfolded it with reverence, like a relic pulled from a cathedral wall. She read it in silence, lips pressed tight. Then she folded it again and set it down with a sigh. I never believed she was really dead, she said, voice quiet but firm. Not entirely. Elizabeth had enemies. People who didn't want her to raise a child outside the legacy of Wakefield Holdings. There were whispers, but we never found proof. Until now, Cole didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure if he was asking for answers or just trying to protect the little girl sitting beside him. Swinging her legs, blissfully unaware that her world was shifting by the minute, Marion looked at Harper again. You said she was abandoned. Cole nodded. On a church step, wrapped in a blue blanket. No note, just her name. Marion blinked slowly. Elizabeth's favorite color was blue. She once told me if she had a daughter, she'd name her Harper after the author who made her fall in love with words. The silence in the room grew loud. Cole felt it settle over his shoulders, something heavy and holy. Harper looked up at him, confused but curious. Daddy, are we okay? Cole swallowed hard. He wasn't sure of anything except one thing, whatever came next. He would make sure this little girl knew exactly how loved she was, even if it took peeling back the layers of a secret 10 years buried to prove it. Cole had never been in a room so quiet and yet so full of noise. Marion's office overlooked the city like it was made of glass and certainty. But inside, everything felt fragile, like one wrong word would shatter the whole thing. He kept looking at Harper, who was now tracing patterns in the velvet arm of the chair with her finger. Oblivious to the weight in the room, Marion didn't speak for a long time. She stared out the window, the letter still in her hand, and when she finally turned back to face Cole, something had shifted. She looked not just older, but burdened by something she'd carried for too long. Elizabeth wrote this letter in the final weeks before her disappearance. I know the handwriting. The phrasing, it's her. Her voice trembled, but only for a second. There were rumors, threats, really, circulating through the family trust. She wanted to step away from the board, move out of the spotlight, raise her child in peace. But the Wakefield name, it doesn't let go that easily. Cole leaned forward. So what happened? What did she do? Marion exhaled. She vanished. Officially, lost at sea. Unofficially, we always suspected she planned it. She was scared, determined, and desperate. The combination makes a woman capable of disappearing off the face of the earth. She paused, but she wouldn't have left that baby without a plan. If Harper ended up at that church, Elizabeth put her there. Cole felt that line hit deep in his ribs. He remembered the night vividly, how the wind whipped around the chapel doors, how the bundle on the step didn't make a sound, just blinked up at him with wide, waiting eyes. Marion sat down and reached into a locked drawer, pulling out a thin, leather-bound folder. These are the last things Elizabeth left in my possession, just in case she ever came back, or in case her child did. She slid it across the table. Inside were a birth certificate with the baby's name left blank, a silver bracelet etched with the letter H, and an ultrasound image dated 6 months before the disappearance. The name printed in the upper right corner. Elizabeth Wakefield. Cole stared at the items. It was undeniable. His daughter wasn't just a girl with a mysterious past. She was the missing piece of a story that the world had stopped trying to understand. Harper finally looked up. Daddy, are we going to stay here? Cole blinked. Caught in the gravity of her question, Marion answered first. That's up to both of you. But there are people, shareholders, family members, who won't be thrilled to learn Elizabeth had a daughter, much less one who grew up outside the family name. You'll need protection, legal counsel, and space to figure out what this means long-term. Cole frowned. I didn't come here for money or titles. I came here to find the truth for her. Marion nodded, softening. And that's why you're exactly the kind of man Elizabeth would have wanted raising her. That night, in the hotel room overlooking the river, Harper curled up beside him on the bed, the bracelet now around her tiny wrist. She kept turning it, watching it catch the lamplight. Do you think she was kind? Harper asked. You're real, Mom. Cole asked back, and she nodded. He looked at her, his voice low. I think she must have been the bravest woman in the world. Harper smiled, content with that answer, and drifted to sleep with the bracelet still clutched in her hand. But Cole lay awake long after. The truth was heavier than he'd imagined. Because somewhere out there, maybe hidden, maybe watching, was a woman the world still believed was dead. And if she was alive, she had to know her daughter had found the letter. Which meant the question was no longer if she would return. It was when, and whether the past she ran from would let her come back at all. The next morning came wrapped in fog. The city looked blurred, like someone had taken a soft cloth and smudged the skyline. Cole stood by the window, a mug of coffee in his hands, staring out at the gray that refused to lift. He didn't know what he expected to happen. Maybe a phone call, maybe someone pounding at the door with more answers, but all that came was silence. Behind him, Harper was sprawled across the hotel bed, a coloring book open, the silver bracelet still snug around her wrist. It shimmered each time her crayon moved, a small, silent reminder that her life was no longer what it had been just days ago. Cole hadn't planned on staying in Boston long. A meeting, a couple answers, then home. That was the idea. But Marion had insisted they stay a little longer. And the look in her eyes when she said it made Cole agree. Something was coming. He could feel it in the quiet, the way the city seemed to hold its breath around them. By noon, they were back in Marion's office. This time, she wasn't alone. A man in his 60s, tall and cold-eyed, stood near the window, arms folded. This is Charles Wakefield, Marion said carefully. Elizabeth's uncle, the current head of the family trust. Cole extended a hand. But Charles didn't take it. He simply stared at Harper with an expression that sat somewhere between disbelief and disdain. So this is the child, he said, more to Marion than to Cole. The heir. Cole didn't like the word. He wasn't sure why, but it felt like a trap. She's a little girl, he replied flatly. Not a headline. Charles raised an eyebrow. She's a Wakefield escadron. That comes with weight. Marion stepped between them slightly. We're not here to argue bloodlines. We're here to discuss how to proceed. Quietly, Charles turned back to the window. You should have burned that letter. Cole stiffened. Why? Because it proves your niece didn't drown. That she wanted a life outside the family business. Charles's mouth twitched. Because it disrupts everything we've built. That was the moment Cole realized they weren't just dealing with a mystery. They were stepping into a power struggle. A world where legacy wasn't about love or family. It was about control. He looked at Harper, who sat quietly flipping through a book Marion had given her, completely unaware that her very existence had just upset an empire. After the meeting, Marion walked them out herself. She didn't say much until the elevator doors closed behind them. Then she looked at Cole and said, be careful. The Wakefields don't lose gracefully. And if Elizabeth is still alive, this just became a countdown. That night, back at the hotel, Cole packed their bags. He didn't say anything to Harper, just moved around this room with quiet purpose. The city didn't feel safe anymore, not because of noise or crime, but because of silence, too many people who knew too much, and one child at the center of it all. He called the airline, booked an early flight. They'd leave at sunrise, but sleep never came. Not really. He sat by the window, watching lights blink over the river, wondering what Elizabeth would want him to do, protect the truth, or protect her daughter. At 2:17, Ma. The phone on the nightstand rang. Cole reached for it, heart slamming against his ribs. He answered, voice rough, a pause, then a woman's voice, soft and certain. She found it. That was all she said. But Cole knew. His fingers gripped the receiver like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Where are you? He asked, voice barely a whisper. Another pause. Then the line went dead. He stared at the handset, breath catching. Elizabeth Wakefield was alive, and she had just made contact. Cole didn't sleep after the call. He didn't move, didn't speak, just sat in the dark, the receiver still resting in his hand, the dial tone long gone. His pulse throbbed behind his eyes, in his throat, everywhere. He'd imagined this moment a dozen different ways, finding Elizabeth alive, hearing her voice, bringing Harper into a world that had once tried to erase her, but he never expected it to feel like this. So quiet, so unfinished. Just one sentence. She found it. No name, no explanation, no promise to meet. Still, it was her. He knew it in his bones. And suddenly, leaving Boston felt premature. By dawn, Harper was curled against his side, her breath slow and steady, her tiny fingers clutching the hem of his sleeve. Cole stared out the window, watching the city blink awake. He didn't want to move. He didn't want to go anywhere until he knew what came next. At 6, Ma. He called Marion. She picked up on the first ring, voice already tight with worry. He told her everything, the call, the voice, the words. Marion was silent for a moment. Then she said, "It's her. It has to be. And if she's reaching out, she's close." Cole asked the only question that mattered. "What now?" Marion's answer was slow. "Careful. Now. We wait." She made the first move. Let her make the next one. But waiting never sat well with Cole. By noon, they were back at Marion's office. She had started combing through Elizabeth's final communications, the encrypted backups she'd saved in case this very moment ever arrived. Most were dead ends, false trails, messages cut off mid-thought, but one file stood out. It was a voice recording, unlabeled, undated. Cole pressed, play, and there she was, Elizabeth's voice, clear and shaking, recorded in what sounded like a storm. "If you're hearing this, then maybe I'm finally ready. Or maybe I've run out of places to hide. Either way, you deserve to know the truth." The message continued, broken in places by wind and panic. But the story was clear. Elizabeth had planned the disappearance. She feared her family, feared what they would do if she refused to hand over her child. She talked about a man, unnamed, who had threatened to take custody, to raise the baby as a Wakefield and nothing more. So she ran. With help from a friend in the Dominican Republic, she staged the accident, changed her name, and delivered the child in secret. Her plan was to return when it was safe. But time got away, fear deepened, and eventually, silence became survival. Cole felt something crack inside him, not just for Elizabeth, but for Harper. All these years, they'd both been living in the shadow of a woman who was never really gone. He looked down at the bracelet on Harper's wrist. The letter had been the breadcrumb. Now came the path. He turned to Marion. "If she's here, she needs to know we were not hiding." Marion nodded, then paused. "There's one more thing." She reached into her drawer and slid over a single photograph. It was grainy, taken from a surveillance camera at a train station 3 nights ago. A woman in a dark coat, hood up, holding something small and square in her hand. A book, The Midnight Fox. Cole felt the air shift. "That's her," he said quietly. "She's watching." Marion's mouth pressed into a tight line. Then she's trying to decide if she's ready to step back into the world, or if it'll destroy everything she tried to protect. That night, back at the hotel, Cole didn't pack. He didn't check flights. He sat beside Harper, who was fast asleep, and placed the photograph on the nightstand. Then he turned toward the door and whispered into the quiet, "You don't have to be afraid anymore. She found it, and we're not running somewhere out there." He knew Elizabeth was listening. The next morning was unlike the others. Cole sensed it before his eyes even opened. The hotel room felt heavier, like something had shifted in the air. He sat up slowly, scanning the space, but nothing looked different. Harper still slept soundly, her braid half loosened against the pillow. the book she'd fallen asleep with resting on her chest. But the stillness was charged, almost expectant. On the floor, just beneath the door, was an envelope. Thick, cream-colored, no markings on the outside. Cole's breath caught. He picked it up carefully, peeled it open. Inside was a note, handwritten in the same looping script as the letter he had found inside the book. Only 6 words. Meet me. Waterford B. Pier 7. The handwriting was unmistakable. Elizabeth? Cole didn't tell Harper until lunch. He wanted to be sure, wanted to feel the ground beneath him before telling his daughter that the mother she never met might be waiting for them by the water. When he finally did, Harper blinked slowly, processing, then simply asked, "Will she know me?" Cole swallowed hard. "I think she already does." At 2:40 p.m. Ma. They left the hotel, the sky thick with clouds, the kind that looked ready to open up but never quite did. The cab ride to the pier was quiet. Harper stared out the window. Cole kept glancing at her in the rearview, memorizing her face, how brave she looked without even trying. Pier 7 was quiet, the wind carrying the scent of salt and rust. Cargo ships loomed in the distance, their shadows like sleeping giants. Cole held Harper's hand as they walked to the end of the dock. No one was there, just a bench, a breeze. Then, footsteps, soft, slow, deliberate. He turned, and there she was, Elizabeth Wakefield, alive. She looked older, thinner, wrapped in a navy coat that swallowed her small frame. Her blonde hair was shorter now, tucked beneath a knit cap. And her eyes, those famous, camera-flashed eyes, looked right past Cole and landed on the little girl by his side. They didn't speak right away. Elizabeth knelt. "Hi," she said softly. "I think I've waited my whole life for this moment." Harper stared at her, then took a step forward. "Are you my mom?" Elizabeth nodded. Her voice cracked. "Yes, baby, I am." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred, like the earth paused, just long enough to let them breathe the same space. Cole stepped back, giving them room. His heart thudded so hard it felt like a drumbeat inside his ribs. Harper reached out slowly, touching the edge of Elizabeth's sleeve, and just like that, something long broken quietly began to heal. They sat on that weathered bench for nearly an hour, the wind tugging at their sleeves, seagulls circling above like the moment itself needed witnesses. Elizabeth told Harper stories, not the grand kind with yachts or boardrooms, but small, tender ones, about how she dreamed of the day she'd see her again, about the name Harper, chosen long before she was born, inspired by the book that made her believe in strength wrapped in softness. She explained why she ran, why she stayed hidden, and why that letter had been her only way of whispering across time, "I didn't forget you." Harper didn't understand all of it. Not yet, but she understood enough that the woman beside her wasn't a stranger, that sometimes moms come back in the most unexpected ways, and that maybe love, when buried deep enough, could still find its way to the surface, cracked and weathered, but whole. When they finally stood to leave, Elizabeth looked at Cole. She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't try to explain what couldn't be undone. She simply said, "Thank you for loving her the way I couldn't." And Cole, with Harper's hand now in both of theirs, nodded once. "She saved me too." They didn't talk about what came next. Not that day. The future could wait. What mattered was this moment, the girl who bridged 2 worlds, the mother who refused to be lost forever, and the man who proved you didn't need to share blood to build a family. Sometimes, all it took was $1, a dusty book, and a letter waiting to be found. Sometimes, life hides its greatest gifts in the smallest places, a $1 book, a forgotten letter, a child's quiet question. This story reminds us that family isn't just who you're born to. But who shows up, stays, and chooses love again and again? It teaches us that the past, no matter how complicated, doesn't have to define the future. That even when hope feels buried, it's never truly gone. And most of all, it shows us that miracles don't always arrive with fanfare. They arrive on piers, in whispered truths, in the way a little girl reaches for her mother's hand without hesitation. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you love, or simply made you believe in second chances again, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Follow us for more true-to-life stories about kindness, resilience, and the quiet power of love that refuses to quit. Because sometimes, the stories we tell are the very ones someone else needs to find their way back home.